I would request Professor A. Subramaniam Raju, Coordinator, UGC Center for Maritime Studies, to welcome the gathering.
Good morning to everyone. Respected His Excellency Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, former Ambassador to Myanmar, Mexico, and High Commissioner to Kenya and South Africa, Minister of External Affairs, Government of India. Respected Professor PV Rao, National Fellow, ICSSR, New Delhi. Respected His Excellency Ambassador Thomas Lucas Zuk, Institute of International Affairs, University of Warsaw, Poland. Respected Professor Sam Batman, Professorial Research Fellow, Australian National Centre for Indian Ocean Resource and Security, University of Wollongong, Australia. Delegates, faculty members, research scholars, students, media, friends, ladies and gentlemen. I, on behalf of the UGC Center for Maritime Studies, cordially invite you for the two-day international conference on Indo-Pacific Emerging Dynamics. When we choose this topic, because every year we organize a seminar and then we thought what should be the appropriate topic for this year. And we have seen that Indo-Pacific could be very relevant and very important aspect in which we look at in the whole world is now witnessing that the power shifting from west to east, and then again east. We are talking about whether this Indo-Pacific as a construct is a political construct or a geostrategic construct or geoeconomics or geopolitical. When we talk about this as a construct, how do we look at, how do we understand about the different countries view on Indo-Pacific, whether in the security dimension or in economics dimension in the terms of development, and particularly when we talk about sustainability, which has come now forefront as a challenge for every country in the world. And probably we felt then this would be the appropriate topic to dwell on various issues which are related to the topic on which we have gathered here to discuss. When we talk about Indo-Pacific, which is seen as interlinked and integrated geopolitical, geoeconomic space from India to the Indian to the Pacific to America. When we talk about this Indo-Pacific, how do we look at with the confluence of oceans, or we look at from Asia Pacific to Indo-Pacific, or Asia Pacific and Indian Ocean, or Indian Asia Pacific? There are different terminology used by different scholars, and we are here to discuss about how this could be seen as very, very significant in the maritime domain. And when you talk about this convergence or confluence of these two oceans, which is called as Indo-Pacific, I think as a single maritime entity, we need to look at how the various issues, not necessarily security aspects, but also we have to look for, because we know everything that, you know, that 95% of trade travels through sea, and littoral or non-littoral countries are depending on sea. I think there it makes us to think about how this Indo-Pacific is going to be very important for every country in the world. Not necessarily part of Indo-Pacific, but also it also has a significant impact on other countries across the world. And we also must know about today's speaker for inaugural, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, who was also talking about beyond ASEAN. He also came with the Lookist policy 3.0, where he was mentioning that India needs to look at that some of the players, not necessarily only South Asian region, but also should go beyond US and China, Japan, Australia, and South Korea, which are very, very important aspect when we look at about this topic in today's seminar on Indo-Pacific. When we talk about this Indo-Pacific, we have roughly 38 countries sharing 44% of world surface and 65% of world population, and it contributes 62% of world GDP and 46% of world trade, where it is very important for us to look at that how Indo-Pacific is so important for the countries in Indo-Pacific. And also we have 4 largest economies, US, China, Japan and India, and major countries including Australia. And we have 10 countries, Southeast Asian countries, which are also very, very important when we talk about Indo-Pacific. And it is seen that Indo-Pacific not necessarily to be seen that it is going to be controlled by a few major countries, but it should be seen as that it belongs to every nation in the world. We believe in the maritime domain that ocean belongs to everyone or ocean belongs to none. And this is the concept in which we all look at. That is what UNCLOS 3 was talking about, advocating that ocean should be seen as property of every nation state. And when we talk about this, and particularly Indian government is talking about Indo-Pacific, where free and open, prosperous, peaceful and inclusive Indo-Pacific, which requires a vision in terms of its economic linkage and connectivity, which is very important. And China needs to be seen as a factor in determining the future of Indo-Pacific, and geographical boundaries are yet to be demarcated in some of the areas in Indo-Pacific, and still it is in the evolution process, and we need to look at about how to maintain rules-based order, particularly obey or adherent to the UNCLOS 3. And we should focus on how this rising power asymmetry in Asia, which is going to be seen very important, and the transition of power from west to east, and particularly Indo-Pacific, how it is going to determine in the near future. And when we talk about whether this Indo-Pacific as a construct is going to contain any country, then probably it will be difficult for us to look at the future of Indo-Pacific, because we have to look at, and particularly Indian government is looking at, and even Prime Minister Narendra Modi was talking about, he is also offering that China and Russia also should be part of Indo-Pacific. And also categorically he mentioned about, and he brought this saga, which is also very important, that security growth for all in the region, which is very important. And India is so conscious about that, how to maintain this ocean free from conflicts, free from threats, particularly non-traditional security threats. And that's where we have to look at how to maintain sea lanes of communication, which is very important for every country's economy. Every country's economy now depends on safeguarding the sea. That is something very important. And also we look at, and where we are also looking subsequently after this 2-day international conference, we are also going for international workshop on ocean governance. I think this is very important for the countries in the world, and particularly little states. They have to look at that Samudra Manthan, which is we are looking at the relevance of Samudra Manthan, the turning of the sea, angel versus demon. I think here we need to look at state versus state should not be there, state versus non-traditional security threats. Otherwise it's very difficult for us, and we have to derive from this, I think, very important that state should not go against another state, but the state should go and cooperate with another state to address these non-traditional security threats. Thereby we look at safeguarding the sea lanes of communication or navigation, etc., etc. I think that is something which will lead to stability, peace and prosperity. I think that is partnership and not dominance that should not be prevailed in this region, and development and not conflict. And this is what we look at, and this is what we expect that the next 2 days we will discuss about the various issues related to Indo-Pacific, and particularly how we could visualize future about Indo-Pacific. And also a few words about the center. The Center for Maritime Studies was established in 2014, and sanctioned 1 assistant professor and 2 research associates, but then we could not get a suitable person to be appointed. At the moment the center is virtual, and no one is in the center. And we have organized 3 seminars and 2 international workshops, and also with the initiative of the Vice Chancellor, we are going to introduce diploma and certificate course in maritime studies in the next academic year, as well as PhD program. I think that is next academic year we are going to have these programs. And also when you look at that soft core optional papers also we are going to introduce, because this is very important aspect, because maritime domain where we we feel we hardly find scholars on maritime, expertise on maritime studies. So that's why our Vice Chancellor was keen on introducing the courses to encourage young people to have expertise on maritime affairs or maritime domain. And we have 3 publications. One is going to be released, the 3rd volume is going to be released today once Vice Chancellor come here, and that is on blue economy of India, and also 5 monographs we are going to release, and total 8 monographs we have published so far, and 3 volumes based on the seminar proceedings. And we look at that the next in the future, within 3 months, we are also designed to organize a seminar on Andaman Nicobar in Andaman. We are going to plan. We have to look at that how Andaman Nicobar is going to be very significant for enhancing India's profile, maritime profile, as well as how Andaman Nicobar can be seen as a gateway enter into Indo-Pacific or Southeast Asia or to BIMSTEC, and particularly from Indira Point, you look at hardly more than, is less than 90 kilometers, one can see Indonesia. I think this is probably, we have to reorient our policy, our focus should be looking at how Andaman Nicobar is going to be very important. I think that is also we are now looking in the future we are going to. And we also had the collaboration with ICWA and with RIS, and we have organized a series of lectures with the collaboration with these organizations. And also we organized a series of lectures we initiated with Admiral Arun Prakash in 2015. And in the beginning, 2.5 years status of the performance of the center by the UGC. Unfortunately, in the initial stage, 1.5 years, it was kept in dark, but then assessment of 2.5 years, literally 1 year assessment was taken by UGC for 2.5 years, and they have given very good status. So we are very happy to know about that, that UGC is happy with the activities at UGC Center for Maritime Studies. And we are going to look at that. The next phase is we are looking for the 15 lakhs they have given for the 5 years, but we are expecting now this 15 lakhs to be 1 crore for next 5 years. And 1 faculty sanction, we are also looking for 3 faculty and 2 research associates. We would like to look for 5 research associates. Thereby we can make this center as an institute and hub for research. And in this part of country, we need to look at how to develop the activities and particularly how to promote maritime studies, and that is a challenge for us at the moment. With that, I think I look at that, we expect this, we will have very meaningful discourse on various issues related to Indo-Pacific, and we will come with some of the suggestions which could be submitted to the policy makers and some of the respective centers. So with that, I cordially invite you all, and I am very thankful to you all for gracing this inaugural session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As it is part of our tradition to begin on a positive note, I would request all the guests to come forward for the lighting of lamp. Without taking much of the time, may I request Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia to give the inaugural address of the session.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Professor Bateman, Professor Rao, Ambassador Luksa Zub, and Professor Raju. distinguished participants at the international seminar on Indo-Pacific. I should begin by expressing my sincere joy on being here in the wonderful surroundings of the Pondicherry University. And I must say, like all of you, I'm caught by the zeal and dynamism of Professor Raju, who is the brain behind this event. Mind you, this is not an easy subject, considering that for the last decade at least, all of us in one form or the other are trying to fathom the mysteries of the Indo-Pacific. Such a huge magnitude of literature has now emerged on it, and yet one can say every month, every year, the scene changes, and therefore there is always perhaps something new to reflect on and something new to say on the subject. But I'm particularly happy that we have today a quality audience, an excellent mixture of experience and youth, and therefore, as far as I'm concerned, I see this as my task to try to pass on some of the enthusiasm we have about this subject to our young scholars who are gathered here. Professor Raju has made a number of important observations, and I'm particularly happy to note that this conference will produce a book, because then our ideas will travel out to well beyond this venue and reach out to a larger audience. Therefore, as each of us comes to the platform and speak, please remember, and I certainly remember it very well, I know it very well, that this is just the trigger through which the ideas and synthesized view and the recommendations that will emerge at this conference will go far and wide. What I would like to do is to really do two things. One is to capture a few transformational or defining trends that lie behind the whole plethora of developments which are taking place in the Indo-Pacific in the past decade or so. The important thing is not as to which leader went where and what he said when, and what is there in the MOU and what figured in the international agreement. The issue that we need to focus on is as to what are the principal trends. And then based on that we can see the host country, India, what exactly is it doing to address the kind of situations that have emerged in this region. I say this in the context of a similar conference I had the chance to organize back in 2013 when I was serving ICWA and Subha was also there. So organizing an international conference on the same subject 6 years back was something new, but now it is more challenging because the situation has become more challenging. So let me try to straight away delineate the trends. I have identified 7 of them, and then I will go straight to the second part of my presentation, and I'll try to be as quick as possible. The first trend, according to my research, is that from the 50s to 80s, Europe was the main theater of world politics, whereas in the late 1980s and 1990s, the focus shifted somewhat to West Asia. You remember the oil crisis and Iranian Revolution and the 2 wars in Iraq and the Arab Spring and things like that. But now Since the early decades of the 21st century, Indo-Pacific, stretching from the western Pacific to the east coast of Africa, or its core segment extending from Japan and Australia to India. As you know, they are not common definitions yet. Indo-Pacific has become the principal global theater where all the key power centers of the world are engaged in redefining their roles and relationships as a way to promote their respective national interests. This is the platform where the drama of shift of global power from the west and north to the east and south has been unfolding day by day. So this is the first trend before you. The second trend is the rise in China's economic strength, military power, political and diplomatic influence in Asia and elsewhere. And this is obviously now an uncontested reality. This has given birth to, let's call a spade, aggressiveness and unilateralism by the Chinese government in the South China Sea and increased activism in South Asia as well as the Indian Ocean region. The Belt and Road Initiative is but a reflection of China's new strength and desire to be a hegemonic power. Third trend, while the US remains the world's largest economy and the foremost military power in Asia and the world at large, its will to use that power to curb and counter the rise of China remains debatable. America's policy fluctuations and the mix of inconsistency and unpredictability of the Trump presidency, marked by frequent personnel changes in top posts, exist alongside the architecture of new legislative acts and policy declarations and measures by the executive that project the US determination to defend its interests. So you have both negatives and positives, and the result is deepening confusion. Nobody is totally clear as to where exactly the US stands today. So much so that if you ask any knowledgeable person as to what is going to be the result of US-China trade disputes, whether it will lead to a macro deal or it will end up in intensifying the conflict, frankly, nobody really is sure at this stage. The fourth trend is the re-emergence of the quadrilateral dialogue involving the US, Japan, India, and Australia. This is the calibrated response of the four democracies in preventing a unipolar Asia. It makes gradual progress because under pressure from the US, China has been making limited efforts to stabilize and improve relations with Japan and India. And in this context, I would like to underline that developments in Japan and China relations, particularly since last year, when Prime Minister Abe went to China in October, it merits a close watch. So essentially, welcome to the Vice Chancellor, and we are very happy to see you here, Professor Gurmeet Singh. So essentially, the developments which are happening in Japan-China relations, they should be taken into account. I can say, since Professor Batman is here, that Australia has indeed joined India and Japan to craft and work on its own hedging strategy. Therefore, it is apt to argue that further development of the Quad may be in proportion to the aggressiveness or conciliation shown by Beijing to threaten or accommodate the vital interests of the other Asian powers. So in a way, we can say the future of the Quad would depend on China's behavior, a point which Professor Raju also made earlier. The fifth trend relates to ASEAN as the grouping of 10 resident powers of the region. And we have with us two distinguished scholars from Malaysia. But I think I have to put it the way I see it. ASEAN has become an ineffectual player despite its assertion of ASEAN centrality, to which incidentally every power claims to be adhering to. So you have a situation where everybody subscribes to the view of ASEAN centrality, and yet that centrality is being compromised day by day. So this disunity among ASEAN member states is reflected in its approach on the South China Sea dispute and on Indonesia's current endeavor to evolve consensus on the concept of Indo-Pacific and ASEAN's role in it. So in a way, we need to study very closely the ASEAN's emerging role in the Indo-Pacific architecture. The sixth trend, and this specifically relates to South China Sea, we can honestly recognize that China has largely had its way through the use of force or coercion, much to the detriment of countries such as Vietnam and the Philippines. The pushback to it is in the form of the region's frequent reaffirmations of freedom of navigation and overflights, freedom of navigation operations by the US Navy, and the movement at snail's pace of negotiations between China and ASEAN on the code of conduct. So you have a very blurred picture as far as South China Sea is concerned, except that on critical issues, China already has succeeded securing its objectives, and the rest of the world has really not been able to do very much to stop it. And finally, in the Indian Ocean component of Indo-Pacific, what is visible is a sharpening of rivalry between the Chinese Navy and the Indian Navy, which is backed by the US Navy. Chinese gains on India's periphery have been quite significant. On the other hand, through proactive diplomacy centered on Africa and the Indian Ocean states, India has strengthened its position by forging links in the domain of maritime security. So this is the very brief snapshot of how we see the situation, the strategic situation in the Indo-Pacific. Now, very quickly, what is India's approach on this? I think this is what we need to delineate as well. And here I am not just referring to the government policy, I am referring very much to India's strategic view, to which all of us, the academics, think tanks, everybody have contributed. I think it would be honest to say that today India has not just an Act East policy, it also has an Indian Ocean policy, and it even has an Indo-Pacific policy. Clearly, the last 5 years have been significant about this, and the entire set of documents which have emerged, starting from the speech of Prime Minister Modi, delivered on 12th March 2015 in Mauritius, you remember, to the Shangri-La dialogue, which was delivered in July 2018, especially in this 3-year period, so much has emanated from the South Bloc that young researchers sitting here have a huge amount of material to really analyze and fathom. It is not just a question of putting across what the government said. The critical thing is to see as to whether their actions, their measures, their policies match with what the government is saying. And this is the challenge I hope many of you will take up. Now, in the context of what happened at Shangri-La, and I'm not going into that, and how India presented its vision of the Indo-Pacific, a question came up that it is fine if Indo-Pacific is peaceful and prosperous and it includes everybody, as Professor Raju said, China also and Russia also, and everybody follows the law and everything runs hunky-dory, then that is fine. But what if the real world falls short of that vision? What is India's plan B? In other words, how does India defend its vital interests if a major power refuses to adopt a peaceful, orderly, and cooperative conduct so essential for the region's stability, security, and prosperity? My assessment takes me to the inevitable conclusion: the Quad is India's plan B. Economic dimensions of the Indo-Pacific will continue to receive the attention they deserve, because we should not be confined only to the strategic facets. China's BRI is one option before the stakeholders of the region. It was mostly welcomed and accepted with some enthusiasm, but there is now enough evidence of adverse reaction, cancellation or reduction of projects, and calls for a careful review. It is also important to note that other powers have come out with their concepts of connectivity initiatives, all four of us: India, Australia, Japan, and the US. The coming years will reveal as to what extent these get accepted and implemented for common benefit. Then there is the broad dossier of economic integration. I'm not going into that. I'm sure some of our colleagues who are economists will tell us more about it. But one quick word about RCEP. I think this is a crucial year. There's a lot of expectation in the region that RCEP will become a reality. My own judgment is that the speedy conclusion of RCEP depends as much on the receptiveness of China and ASEAN to India's needs and sensibilities as on Indian industry's willingness to confront the challenges of competitiveness. So it's no point just saying, will it happen or will it not happen? The question is to understand the forces that might or might not allow it to become a reality. A quick word about blue economy, because this is one bond between the center and myself. Blue economy has to be another component of Indo-Pacific. If the idea of Indo-Pacific is anchored in the ocean space, it is pointless to restrict it to security only. The other two pillars of blue economy, namely sustainability and productivity of oceans, too need to be considered and strengthened. Awareness in India is growing up fast, but whether policy changes are taking place and whether action on the ground by business and industry is happening, I cannot say that with certainty. In fact, we know that there the progress is slow. And therefore, I am very happy to note that this seminar will further enhance that awareness about blue economy in India by examining possible convergence of interests in developing the sector. So in the end, may I raise a crucial question, and this is a question to all the participants. I think we need to examine this question. It's not enough to say our piece, but to examine and then debate. The question is, what do we expect to happen in the region in the next 5 years? Armed conflict, confrontation, Cold War, unbridled competition, unexpected accidents, development of harmonious relations, or some kind of a mixture. I think we need to tell those who mold policy as to what is our synthesized view in terms of the worst case scenario of war, the best case scenario harmonious relations, or somewhere on between in this large matrix. The seminar produced an excellent concept note, and it has assured us that we will go into all aspects of the Indo-Pacific: political, economic, security, defense, and political. And essentially, our attempt would be to come up with some kind of a common view, and therefore, it is my great pleasure to wishing to this conference optimal success. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your informative words. And I hope that in the end of the seminar, we together come to the answer of your question. And I'm glad to mark the presence of our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Gurmeet Singh, in the hall. And carrying on with the tradition, I would request Professor Gurmeet Singh, Vice Chancellor, Pondicherry University, to honor our guests with a small token of love and respect.
very old seasoned diplomat, Professor Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, my very dear friend Ambassador Thomas from Poland, Professor PV Rao, and Professor Batman. I only heard and read about a Batman during our younger days in a comic, but I never knew that I'll be able to see a real Batman sitting here. Well, it's always a pleasure having all of you here. Whenever there is a symposium or a conference or a workshop organized here in Jumisag, I find it very interesting and useful all the way because of two reasons. One, you would have all read by now that, and you would have understood, of course, I'm sure, that Southeast Asian region is gaining importance in the world order in a big way. If you trace back, the Cold War is over. Middle East is no longer important. It is on the boil, in fact. And the trade routes which we had, conventional ones, are Suez Canal and Panama Canal and all, they are receding in their importance. In fact, of late, Indian Ocean, as I said, is becoming one of the busiest trade routes in the world. And we, maybe by the blessings of Almighty or whatever you want to say, we have something coming to us in a very right manner, but then earlier on in good old days, we never paid due attention to that. That's what we always say, a permanent aircraft carrier in Indian Ocean. That's our Andaman and Nicobar. For good 2.5 decades, we never bothered about this, the importance of this. But of late, yes, we have paid due attention. There is a naval base, there is a sizable presence of everything. We are giving due importance to this, which it rightly deserved. In fact, a cable is being laid now for the full, fastest possible connectivity there, which is the need of the hour, in fact. So all these things are taking place, and this area is becoming very important. Now, obviously, Indian Ocean, we being very near to that, we should be able to have a fullest control of this, and the whole world should be looking up to us. But there is a catch here. The way China is growing, and our designs have never been to occupy any land and to force our policies on anyone. We are traditionally a very peace-loving country, but China has a very nefarious designs, whatever you may say. And all said and done, China cannot be ignored by India. We have to learn Chinese language. We have to get into their inner circles to find out what way they are coming up. We need to do full research, and it has to be undertaken in a big way in order to move ahead. Now, youngsters, obviously, when we talk to them, they'll say, well, we have very strong Navy, we have a lot of friendship with the countries. Why don't we force our ways on these? Gone are the days when we used to think of this. We cannot engage any country. Leave aside bigger powers, even a small country like Maldives, we cannot flex muscles. There are other ways in world order to control, and that is through diplomacy. Active diplomacy, proactive diplomacy, in fact. And that is where we need to engage most of the nations so that whenever we propose anything in the world should stand with us. We have done very well diplomatically. We have shown the right way, in fact, whenever we wanted, barring few incidents where in Security Council people have vetoed some of our things. You know that part also. But overall, India has gained respect. Most of the nations, they think that India is a peace-loving nation. It means well for the world order. And there, unfortunately, I'll say, it is not the size or the economy of a country, it is the number which counts in world bodies. And when we count number, there are smaller countries like Papua New Guinea or Seychelles or Senegal. All these will count equally. And there, India needs to play a very important role to have a right kind of an order in our Indo-Pacific region. And for that, I think I'll give my compliments to our diplomatic corps that they have really done very well. African continent is one where we need to play our diplomatic activity very properly in order to gain momentum in our ideals. And that is what they have done it. It is through these diplomatic initiatives that we can have a better control rather than flexing our muscles. We can engage countries rather than indulging in full-fledged war. This question our young friends repeatedly ask me that, well, Bangladesh is a small country, Lanka is a small country, Pakistan is reeling under all kinds of internal problems and economic problems. And why don't we just finish them off? Well, you think of doing this, the whole world will put sanctions against you. Gone are the days, when you would hit somebody and put him on the floor. It is the word of diplomacy. And that is where we need to count. That is where we need to improve. We have already done very well. And this initiative of our UMISAT and this center of UGC, which is on blue economy, is playing a very important role. It is highlighting the importance of this. People are working on this. People are working on various aspects of this, economic, defense related, commerce related. And this is a very important center where we can play a key role in putting across our ideas to various bodies. One important body would be external affairs. And people often criticize me when I come here and encourage the center. They say it's a small center. Whenever there's a big seminar, you do not have full attendance. I said it's not a question of full attendance. I don't expect a chemist or a physicist to come here and sit here to listen to these talks. What is required is the students associated with this center. I don't expect there to be a large number. It cannot be. Students associated with history, students associated with economics, philosophy, commerce, they in small numbers can come here, but whatever number is coming, once they pick up the idea from here, it can develop into a good concept paper. And once, all these thoughts will emanate from seminars of this kind. Once we document these and send it across to the concerned bodies, this is where the ideas will be taken up. This is where they'll think what can be done. If you expect 3 vice chancellors of this subject to sit together and decide on this, I don't think they'll have the mind and time. Or if you tell 2 diplomats to do this kind of a study, they also are busy in their own work. They cannot sacrifice that to do this unless they are specifically assigned this duty, which some people do get it at times in the form of a study leave in your career. That's different, but otherwise it is through these deliberations when young minds will sit together and they'll rub shoulders with experts like Ambassador Bhatia and Ambassador Thomas and Batman and Rao, all put together. That's where the right kind of feelings and ideas will be generated. They'll be documented and ultimately will be sent across, and it is these which will bring in the kind of order that we are expecting the world order to be ultimately. So I wish the seminar a grand success, and I compliment this center, particularly Professor Raju, who takes great initiatives. I was, not very long ago, the Postal Department had organized a function here in connection with 150 years of Mahatma Gandhi's birth anniversary, and they released some stamps. And it was all done by, the function was all done by school students. And the general manager of the Postal Department of Chennai region told me that we have sponsored not many prizes and to encourage the children primarily. So I kept on distributing prizes. The parents of the kids were also there. The auditorium was jam-packed. I kept on giving prizes one after another. I would have distributed so many prizes that I started getting a feeling that the prizes I have distributed are much more than the number present here. And ultimately, I had to say, anybody who has not got any prize can come down. So here, when we were releasing these books, one by me, one by Rosa, one by Batman, one by Thomas, I was saying, anymore. It's a very heartening feature. Such a good amount of work being done by the center, and so many of these monograms being released, so many monographs in one go, in particular, is a very heartening feature. I think nothing can be more pleasing, for me at least, that wonderful work is being done here. And there are experts who have come all over. They'll find these monographs very useful in their own research career, and youngsters will take a lead out of this and will pick up the threads and carry on their research work, which is a need of the hour. This is a very important area. Southeast Asian region, India-Pacific, will give you lots of problems to work on, and you will be able to work on only when you interact with the experts who are sitting here. Make best use of them, because otherwise, to meet any one of them is a very difficult proposition, let me tell you. So once they are here, many experts are there who have authored all these monographs. Interact with them, find out what best can be done, deliberate on them, and then document this into a good paper which shall bring a lot of credit, of course, to you, but at the same time, it will bring in a good credit to Pondicherry University also, which is what I want. That's my selfish interest. So wonderful work done. My compliments to the center and my gratefulness to all those experts who have traveled from far-flung areas. I've always been maintaining traveling these days is not very convenient, not very easy, but then despite all these odds, you have done this. We are really appreciative of your efforts, and I wish you happy interaction here and wish the seminar a grand success. Thank you so very much, and God bless all of you.
Thank you, sir, for your encouraging words. Now, I would request Professor PV Rao, former Director of Center for Indian Ocean Studies, Osmania University, senior-most academician with huge list of publication in the field of maritime affairs, National Fellow, Indian Council of Social Science Research, New Delhi, to come and deliver the keynote address of the session.
Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Singh, the Director of Maritime Studies Center of Pondicherry University, Professor Subramaniam Raju, Your Excellencies, and what I would say, rather in a self-indulgent manner, the grand old man of Asia-Pacific Maritime Studies, Sam Bateman. We have been meeting quite often, but there were little gaps. Nice to see you again after 10 years or so. In fact, when you are here, I feel a little bit nervous. Without you, I would have said more things. Rather, in order not to indulge in some kind of an adulatory or flattery, I would say, like Professor Subramanian Raju, I too had been for about 10 or 12 years heading an Indian Ocean Studies Center at Osmania University, South India. Now let me tell you that in the entire country now, and when I say it, I say with conviction, with hindsight, outside Delhi, we have in Delhi National Maritime Foundation, Society for Indian Ocean Studies, Observer Research Foundation. After taking up maritime studies, they got a wing also. There is no other research center in the Indian university system outside Delhi. There are one or two proprietary demands, I should not take their names, but if there is any one center outside Delhi which is quite actively involved in promoting the maritime studies of India as also the Indian Ocean region, rather the Center for Maritime Studies, Pondicherry Universities. Having been, for me, this center still is only a child, it's not even a boy. As the director himself in 2014, it was given by the UGC, exactly 5 years old. But the child has proved to be already precocious, if not ferocious rather. Books, monographs, not only adoring this occasion, Dr. Raju have been very nice enough to involve me quite actively in the previous seminars and other activities related to this center. And I could see, rather I'm jealous of him, envious of him. I could not do as much as he is doing today when I was holding a center for 10 or 12 years old. Thank you, Professor Raju. As our Vice Chancellor had been suggesting to us, and as Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia had very passionately put out, to the best of our ability, we shall try to see that this center will grow more and more. Having said these few words, now let me come to something like sharing with you certain ideas about the Indo-Pacific region and also trying to raise certain issues as such, if the time would permit me. This whole concept of Indo-Pacific has gained rather currency only from the first decade of the 21st century. We used to hear before that only Indian Ocean region essentially pertained to Indian Ocean countries. The Pacific Ocean as an entirely different strategic and maritime realm. and they are essentially two different, not only maritime but also geopolitical zones and domains as such. But we could see over the period of time from the late 80s or the early 90s, a new terminology has gained traction that is called Asia-Pacific region. Then came into some around 2007, first time when the Indians and Japanese had their own dialogue. The Indo-Pacific has, for the first time I understand, came to be used. And over a period of time it has been gaining currency and being widely accepted Indo-Pacific. Then came into currency, though not much heard and highlighted, called Indo-Asia-Pacific. So now we have here a choice of the constructs called Indo-Pacific, Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Indo-Pacific Asia, Asia-Pacific. I mean, student of mine or students like me, we are really confused which of them really proves to really capture the kind of the strategic, economic, maritime and other dynamics which are in a very complementary manner have been dominating both the Indian Ocean region and the Pacific Ocean region. Let me tell you, all these words, essentially they are only imprecise. They are also highly interchangeable. And each of the great power is trying to use this construct to suit rather its own preeminent strategic and maritime interests. But I really do not see much of a qualitative difference between the Indo-Pacific, Indo-Asia-Pacific, Asia-Pacific, so on and so forth. I would rather, I'm comfortable still, maybe old-fashioned as I am. Asia-Pacific perhaps is a more comfortable word for me. That's what I also use in my presentations as well as my literature also. Having said this one, apart from these constructs, commensurately we also see certain maritime narratives also being emerging into this dynamic regions. We see something like what your two ocean theory being talked about the Americans. We also hear the confluence of oceans, but very passionately put across before the Indian Parliament way back when the Prime Minister of Japan, Abe came here. We also keep hearing Mosam advocated by the Indians along with the Sagar at Mauritius by the Honorable Prime Minister of India. We also hear of the Maritime Silk Road and BRI by the Chinese. So what we have is, we have a very really funny situation where each of the great power, from the Indian Ocean side towards the West Pacific, from the West Pacific side toward the Indian Ocean region, as it is extending its political, economic, maritime interest, each is coming out with a coinage and a maritime narrative of its own. But there is nothing wrong. Because if we are really talking about the Asian century, 21st century as Asia-Pacific century, and in which we all know, except the United States of America, all the other countries are genuinely Asian countries or the Asia-Pacific countries. The second largest economy, China, third largest economy, Japan, and people say India is or already fourth largest economy. All are preeminently located and they are having their own dynamic complementarities as such, except the United States of America. I'll continue. Thank you. Now, so we have a tendency over it where at the geopolitical level we got this kind of the construct. Commensurately, simultaneously, we also have certain maritime related narratives also, as I mentioned to you, like the word confluence of the seas advocated by the Japanese. I don't really see much of a contradiction. In these two varieties of the terms, I could say only one thing. There is a growing synergy, complementarity of the interest between all those big powers and also middle powers which are integral to the Asia-Pacific region, be it India or Japan or even I'll come to that point later on, of course, China or Australia itself. Nothing, what is happening is that there is a flourishing complementarity of the relations and definitely each country in its own interest wants to treat the other region not in exclusivist fashion but in a very complementary fashion. Trade, energy, infrastructure, connectivities, tourism, so on and so forth, and many countries at the bilateral level as well as the multilateral level, they are trying to cooperate with each other. Some of the things are already there for us to see, like the Kaledan multilateral project in which we call the India and Burma are involved, and the trilateral connectivity, though a physical one between Thailand, India and Myanmar, these are things already in place. So of course, progress is going on right now. So what I'm trying to say is the current age is the age of connectivities and complementarities, and each power has to have its own way of looking at the things, and that's what the two different varieties of the narratives, the geopolitical on the one hand and the maritime on the other hand, they try to convey to us. Having said this, how does India contextualize into this kind of the narrative? Both the geopolitical, as we call Indo-Pacific, and also the maritime narratives of mutual complementarities. India is a factor, but India was not much of a factor before what we call the Lookist policy 2 was introduced. But we could see certain definite trends, both only in terms of the rhetoric, but also in terms of policy making in Delhi, the South Bloc, that there is a kind of a maritime as well as a geopolitical dynamism visible on the part of New Delhi to move more and more rather actively, dynamically into the Indo-Pacific region. In my view, there are too many push factors. But two push factors that come to my mind is, one is of course, obvious to everybody here, the growing inroads made by China beyond its own conventional realm called the South China Sea and the West Pacific into the Indian Ocean region, call it by whatever the name, the so-called string of pearls. At the same time, there is also counter momentum we see in the Indo-American strategic partnership, what Atal Bihari Vajpayee late called natural allies right from 2008 onwards. But ever since there is a kind of a momentum, the momentum is very much visible and obvious insofar as the trajectory of Indo-American relationship is concerned. So we could see therefore the Quadrilateral Alliance in 2000C, the Malabar being extracted, Malabar beginning with only bilateral naval exercise between the American Navy and the Indian Navy only in the Arabian Ocean, but going well beyond it into the South China Sea area or East Japan Sea area, 2007. We also see around the same time in 2006, there was a maritime cooperation agreement between America and India. We also see around that time, India and Japan signing an agreement on maritime cooperation and strategic partnership. So we see here a coalition of different forces, Japanese, Indians, Americans, to some extent Australians also, they're trying to put into action a new kind of transoceanic, what you call the activity and the dynamism. Second thing is, right from 2004-2015 onwards, this once the Act East Asia, very much attributed to the Indian diplomacy, Lookist policy diplomacy, has come to add more and more momentum to this kind of transoceanic convergence. What I have in mind is 2015, in my view, definitely a year to be remembered with. That was the time the President Obama and the Indian leader, in their joint statement, they made two important what you call undertones. One is both countries, India and America, will work together in the entire region beginning from Africa up to East Asia, a common area of interest to the two strategic partners. Not to be taken seriously is also another word in the joint statement that the South China Sea, specifically mentioned in the joint statement of 2015 between Obama and the Indian Prime Minister, South China Sea needs to be ensured a freedom of navigation and maintenance or safeguarding of the SLOCs, matlab sea lanes of communication. 2015 therefore had added, because I could see the Americans as well as some of our partners and allied countries in the Asia Pacific region, they were rather expressing a sense of dissatisfaction that the Indians indulge only more in lookish rhetoric without much of action, that they should show to be present in this region, maybe because for whatever the reason, diplomatic persuasion or pressure from 2015, ever since this one had taken place, we could see greater momentum had been added from strictly Indian point of view to Indo-Pacific narrative. And the Indian side, both not only from diplomatic point of view, but also from maritime point of view, we have been taking more active interest in this region. Which region? That means the West Pacific region, South China Sea. That was the reason why the Malabar exercises, now they are conducted not only essentially in the Indian Ocean per se, but also in the West Pacific region, East Japan region also. So we could see the growing synergies, complementarities, both at the geopolitical level, also at the maritime level. This is so from Indian point of view, wherein the Americans definitely had given some kind of a push to this kind of Indian greater interest and momentum toward this region. The second one is, this is something some of the younger scholars over here may take up more seriously, though mentioned in some of the literature, that we have been taking, India has been getting more actively involved in some of those Asia Pacific institutions, strategic and maritime, of which India was not a part even about 15-20 years ago. I may mention, for example, the ADMM, Asian Defense Ministers meet. There's something called ADMM Plus also. India is an active partner now. There's something called WPNS, West Pacific Naval Symposium, of which India was not a part. Now India is admitted as an observer country. There's something called a RECAP, essentially confined to the Asia Pacific region. And the last one, but most important one, is RIMPAC, Rim of Pacific region. That's the largest naval forum and exercising institution into which recently India had been admitted. We could see here there's a drive, not only in terms of expanding India's trade and political interest in this region, that ever since the Act East policy had been launched into, say essentially from 2014 or 2015, we could also see that India getting involved into some of these regional institutions, both strategic as well as essentially maritime, like the RIMPAC. RIMPAC, in my view, and Indian Navy's participation in this exercise definitely is not only a symbolic, but a greater indication of India and Indian Navy's involvement in the Pacific region as such. Now, having said this, one, the questions are often raised. Okay, is India only making eastward drive, or as an emerging Indian Ocean country at the center of the Indian Ocean region, is India also able to take certain initiatives on her own? I strongly feel, and in fact I have written a lot about them, simultaneously and in certain circumstances, a little before the Asia Pacific countries had taken their own maritime institutions, introduced, or maritime initiatives, India on her own, had put into place certain maritime naval cooperation institutions and exercises, beginning with the Indian Ocean. Later on, they paved themselves towards the Indo-Pacific region. I quickly mentioned them. Milan is the first such one in 1995. Today, Milan is not confined only to the Bay of Bengal countries, as they were at one time. I could see New Zealand, Australia, other countries also active taking interest in this biennial Milan exercises. We could see India taking IONS, Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. I might sound a little bit a nationalist. Yes, doesn't matter. But I strongly feel for the first time in the Cold War era and post-Cold War era, if there had been any genuine, inclusive, friendly, non-military, peaceful maritime initiative, this is Indian Ocean Naval Symposium of 2008, That was the first time India had inaugurated. Of course, I was there also that time. But later on, though it sounds Indian initiative, it is not just confined to only India, it's moving on. And the former Indian Admiral has said, IONS is not just only confined to India, let it not be read like that one. IONS is a momentum. So the Iranians have conducted, somebody else has conducted, we have taken. And also we have been conducting what you call IFR, International Fleet Review. Without going to details and conscious of my time limitation, I may say this much, that International Fleet Review also is, though taken initiative by India, is not participated only by the Indian Ocean navies. We have countries here, China participated in the IFR, South Korean Navy participated, Fiji, Brunei, New Zealand, all Pacific countries, they actively participated this Bay of Bengal region sponsored International Fleet Review. So what I'm trying to say is, it's not only just India getting participated herself in the West Pacific or South China Sea related agencies and institutions, India on her own has taken some of the initiatives. So all this suggests that there certainly is a growing synergy. Then some of the issues I'm trying to raise, and I'll stop it over here. What are these all Indian from this side, East Asia, West Pacific initiative from that side? What kind of the messages do we get? Dominant mainstream strategic discourse rather suggests, not always fairly, they're essentially counter China moves. As China is advancing into the Indian Ocean region, India, of course, America, the great power, and Japan are very much worried. They are also trying to push their own bilateral or multilateral initiatives to counter China. It sounds good. There's some strong substance in this argument. But it should not be seen only that way. The way the Chinese are growing, not necessarily militarily, but also economically, and the world already says China is already a global power and India is not, and that blunt reality we have to accept, is that we cannot totally look at the Chinese and non-Chinese relationship in a zero-sum game manner. It cannot be, it should not be a mutually exclusivist kind of an equation, China and non-China countries, be it Japan, India, America, Australia, and other countries. The logic of the evolving economic, energy-related, and political interest shows that you can't avoid China in this region. Apart from that one, you have to be conciliatory with China. Somewhere down the line, one has to find certain spaces where that you have to, as the Vice Chancellor very rarely, though he's a science man, he made that point, I'm really glad, that you can't look at China only something like China bashing, China counter, anti-China, that kind of the discourse. I don't think any serious-minded scholar would really buy that argument. Yes, China is a reality in every sense, but somewhere we have to see that where we'll be able to find certain spaces where you can work with the Chinese. Ambassador Sham Sharan, Ambassador Shoshankar Menon says somewhere, it has to be not to look that way. For the Indians and Chinese, there are enough spaces where can put their heads together and work together. In my view, the Wuhan summit between Prime Minister Modi and the Chinese President Xi is one of such messages. Wuhan I am trying to see in a more larger perspective. Some of those foreigners who are here, they may not know the strategic significance that one statement among the others, the President of China and the Prime Minister of India made in the joint statement is, both will work together in development and infrastructure projects in Afghanistan. It may be small letters, but it carries a lot of the meaning. Both shall try to maintain tranquility and peace on the borders. It carries a lot of message. Here is one instance, and among the evolving instances where both these great powers, Asian themselves and neighbors as such, they are really trying to buy the spaces. What I am trying to say is, this either you call the string of pulse doctrine, or the confluence of ocean doctrine, or the Quad alliance, they should not be seen essentially only as anti-China or counter-China choices. That's what I'm trying to say. And as I'm coming to complete now thing, I captured this thing, emerging dynamics in the Indo-Pacific region. Yes. What are the emerging dynamics? I'm updating rather myself. The Americans, for all their so-called strategic partnership with the Indians, the Americans do not have any precise meaning or concept of Indian Ocean for themselves. They treat Southeast Asia, Central Indian Ocean, South Asia, Middle East as according to their own, and they come up with their own new kind of a strategic jargon. The Indian strategists have been passionately arguing, if you really want to prove to be a good strategic partner of India as an Indian Ocean power, only you want to keep India out of the central command. India being treated only integral to the American Pacific command based in Hawaii, I suppose. But the Indian side has been demanding, and rather passionately, and expressed in no less than many occasions their what you call displeasure that the Americans, why do they not treat India also as integral to the say central command? The Americans say their own thing, the Pakistan factor is there, this factor is there, so on and so forth. We could see rather last year a groundbreaking, rather a path-breaking departure. For the first time, the American Navy has also given access to the Indian Navy, what you call the CENTCOM or Naval Center, US Naval, excuse me, US Naval Forces Central Command, located in Bahrain, and for the first time, an Indian Navy observer, or rather Indian Navy as such, is officially permitted into that one. This has to be kept in mind. Second thing is, as I could see, how do we read the Saudi Arabian latest diplomacy, beginning with Pakistan, then coming into India? We may be trained to treat them only essentially from bilateral point of view. Me, as a regular student of international affairs, could see, for the last 8 to 10 years, the GCC countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, they are trying to diversify their economic and trade relations from Euro-Atlantic region towards the Asia-Pacific region. They want to buy more markets in the Asian region. They want to divert their petrodollars towards the Southeast Asian countries, South Asian countries. There's a logic. The logic is the Gulf countries want to slowly de-emphasize the dependence on the essentially American-dominated strategic security syndrome and move away from there toward the dynamic Asia-Pacific region. And Pakistan, India, and other countries, they matter. What I'm trying to say, can we still say Indo-Pacific or the Asia-Pacific? Its contours are only, they are beginning from South Asia, India towards eastward, but not westward. If you take into consideration, and Mr. Chairman, I'll finish in 1 minute. If you look at the other Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific or etc., they do not take into account the Gulf region, West Asia, even Africa. But of late, even these are being taken into account. If you go by the what you call the Indian Navy's access to a CENTCOM, the Gulf countries, their own interest into the Indo-Pacific region or the Asia-Pacific. These are the emergent trends now. Indo-Pacific region cannot be, should not be conceived anymore only as something that's beginning from India towards the eastern hemisphere, but slowly and slowly, it may be rather premature, but it could be a beginning that the Gulf countries also trying to draw themselves and make themselves integral to this kind of Indo-Pacific region. These are some of the emerging trends insofar as the Indo-Pacific region is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Raju. Once again, I wish you that under your leadership, I am doubly confident, sir, the Center for Maritime Studies is growing, and in my own way, though I am aging as a 70 years old man, whatever the little I can, I'll contribute to you, given the complementarity of maritime interest between me and your center. Thank you, sir.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity to visit Pondicherry and meet with Professor Subramanian Raju and other people from the Centre for Maritime Studies. As the introduction suggested, I've had a long association with think tanks related to maritime affairs. Now, I've got a bit of an apology first up. I'm a bit of a rebel. The paper that I submitted to this conference was on maritime safety and the blue economy in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, that's a bit technical and a bit specialist, I think, for this plenary session of the conference. And I've chosen instead, looking at the program, to provide an Australian perspective of the emerging dynamics in the Indo-Pacific region. I noticed looking through the program we're going to have views about Pakistan, ASEAN, Japan, European Union, etc. So I thought it was appropriate that perhaps you had an Australian perspective. First, a bit of policy background. Australia's last Defence White Paper was issued in 2016 and our last Foreign Policy White Paper in 2017. The Defence White Paper had a lot to say about the rules-based global order. However, it also cautioned that that order is under increasing pressure and has shown signs of fragility. The Foreign Policy White Paper largely centred on challenges presented by China and coupled with concerns about the decreased US engagement in the Indo-Pacific. Now, those trends, increased influence of China and concerns about the US role in the region, they've tended to increase, I think, in the last 2 or 3 years. Our Foreign Minister's speech recently gives some clues, I think, about how Australia's strategic thinking might be evolving. 3 trends stand out. The speeches are tending to be less hawkish on China, despite growing concerns in Australia and elsewhere about the cyber security threat posed by China. Secondly, they tend to be less affirmative of the fundamental importance of our strategic alliance with the United States. And thirdly, they tend to make a big issue of the importance of the South Pacific. I'll talk more about those issues shortly. From an Australian point of view, the foreign policy and security environment of the Indo-Pacific is under a challenge from a more confident and powerful China and new uncertainties about the American commitment and leadership in Asia. Increasing concerns are also evident very much in Australia with China's inroads in the South Pacific. Now, the South Pacific has been long regarded, by Australia, along with New Zealand, effectively as our backyard and our partnership, our business. That, of course, has all changed. In Southeast Asia, the maritime environment is becoming increasingly militarised, with regional navies, India, China, Malaysia, Singapore, all building up their navies, and increased naval activity in the South China Sea by the US, China and Japan. Despite the changing circumstances, there's some constants you can see in Australia's strategic priorities. First is the enduring importance of geography. Australia is an island nation with a heavy dependence on seaborne trade. Freedoms of navigation are hugely important for Australia, particularly with regard to the routes through the archipelagos lying to our north and northeast. Geography also means that Australia has wholeheartedly embraced the Indo-Pacific concept. It reflects the fact that Australia is a 3-ocean country with vital strategic interests in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, as well as in the Southern Ocean, whereas Antarctic issues continue to be an important national and strategic interest. In the Indian Ocean, Australia has the largest exclusive economic zone, the longest coastline and the largest search and rescue region, as well as several offshore territories well out in the Indian Ocean, Cocos and Christmas Island in the northeast Indian Ocean, and Heard and McDonald Islands in the Southern Ocean. Secondly, the security of Southeast Asia and South Pacific are fundamental strategic priorities for Australia. Australia very recently has become much more committed to increasing its security role in the South Pacific, including the construction of a joint naval facility with Papua New Guinea and the United States at Manus Island in Papua New Guinea. There's a range of other initiatives that Australia has embarked upon in the South Pacific. Thirdly, interoperability with the United States and support for Washington's position in the region are important Australian concerns. US alliance has been the cornerstone of Australia's defence and strategic policy since World War II, and that's unlikely to change in the foreseeable future. Lastly, there's a nebulous concept of the rules-based global order. I mentioned that our Defence White Paper in 2016 made a lot of the rules-based global order, but I've noticed our ministers have a tendency now to perhaps to talk a little bit less about the rules-based global order. That concept is certainly no longer the same as that was visualised just a few years ago in our Defence White Paper, and that's due as much as anything to the efforts of the United States, Australia's major strategic partners. Now, turning to the Quad's a bit of an enigma for Australia. While the concept has plenty of supporters in Australia, there's also the view that it tends to be too confrontational towards China. Allying against China is seen as dangerous, not only because of Australia's links with China, but also because other countries in the region want to avoid Cold War style type confrontations. Different threat perceptions are also evident between the Quad members. 3, India, China and the United States are strategic competitors of China. And 2, India and Japan have major border disputes with it. Australia's perceptions of China are not so confrontational, and there is sensitivity in the Quad focusing too much on military issues. Australia is also sensitive to the reality that our Southeast Asian neighbours have reservations about the Quad. The foreign and our ministers, I notice, also are tending to talk less and not to mention the Quad. Just turning to some of our regional relations, Australia attaches considerable importance to its regional relations, both in the Southeast Asia and the South Pacific. Effective regional security architecture is a leading national interest. ASEAN and the various forums it has fostered, ASEAN Regional Forum, the ARF, the ASEAN Defence Ministers Plus, the East Asian Summit, are seen as central to maintaining regional order in the face of the United States' declining influence and China's rising power. Australia remains strongly committed to working with ASEAN on regional security issues. In the Indian Ocean, we're also strongly committed to the Indian Ocean Rim Association, its associated forum, Jakarta Concord, etc., and the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. These are institutions that should help manage regional peace and security. Our Foreign Minister, Maurice Payne, at the Raise dialogue in New Delhi last month, made the point very strongly about Australia's support for regional institutions. Chief among other priorities he mentioned for Australia and the Indian Ocean region was a closer partnership with India. A major development helping to build that partnership will be Australia's largest annual naval deployment called Indo-Pacific Endeavour, which starts next month, runs through into April, which will include a large bilateral naval exercise in early April with India. Australia's contribution will include a large amphibious ship, frigates, a supply vessel, a submarine and maritime patrol aircraft. And that's a huge effort being mounted by Australia, and it includes port visits and extensive naval exercises with the Indian Navy. Finally, the Minister argued for policies to promote economic growth and market liberalisation. Great challenges in the Indian Ocean region, given the diversity of the region, the distances involved. But here, of course, the blue economy is a very fundamental issue because As far as the region is concerned, when we start looking for common interests on which you can build cooperation, the ocean itself is really the big common interest, and the blue economy is a subset, of course, of that. In conclusion, the rivalry between China and the US is very awkward for Australia. Like other regional countries, Australia's bilateral relationship with China is a vexed challenge for foreign policy. While showing concern about the destabilising potential of some of China's activities, Australia's foreign policy must also recognise the fundamental importance of good relations with China. Apart from China's domineering position in Australia's overseas trade, and it is by far very much so our number one trading partner these days. Over 1 million Chinese tourists visit Australia each year, and about 160,000 Chinese students are studying in Australia at any one time. China is now the major source of both overseas tourists to Australia and overseas students. Chinese investment in Australia is also highly significant and sometimes a vexed political issue. Two schools of thought are evident in Australia about the future. The first is essentially hawkish and xenophobic. It sees Australia's strategic outlook as deteriorating and potentially facing a threat from China. To that end, there's strong arguments that Australia should be increasing its defence spending, acquiring nuclear-powered submarines rather than the conventionally powered ones we've just signed up for, and strengthening defence relations with Japan, Indonesia and India. Second school perhaps is a bit more pragmatic. It rejects the Cold War thinking that perhaps could be evident in that first school, and stresses the need for constructive trust-based relationships with China. It recognises the rule-based global order has crumbled and there's little Australia can do about it. The focus should now be on working with our Asian partners to gain a consensus understanding of what now constitutes the rules. Thank you very much.
I will first start thanking Professor Raju and Vice Chancellor for his hospitality. It's a great honor to be here in the presence of the Professor Bateman, Ambassador Bhatia, Professor Raju, and many other professors whose books and articles I read. I'm humble diplomat becoming academician, and that's why I will start with the more diplomatic note, because the title of my paper and presentation is about the India and the European Union cooperation in maritime affairs. And we have, the main idea is that in the European Union and also ASEAN, which we have the latest representatives from Malaysia, so we have the common interests, and the common interest is how to train your dragon. This is something which all of us are thinking about. India, ASEAN and Europe, how to make friends with China. This is not easy. This is really not easy. And I as a diplomat, I spent many years in Jakarta, and I've been many times to Malaysia and also ASEAN Secretariat. And I know how much work ASEAN officials spend to train their dragon and to make friends with China through the dialogue. And my point of view is that the point of view of the representative of the biggest and most coherent organization, international organization in the world, the European Union. And we can certainly complain about ASEAN or European Union, but from our perspective of the European Union, the engagement and within the institutional framework, this is the recipe to have friends. Without the dialogue, without the institutions and the forest of dialogue, it's impossible to have the momentum and the understanding from the other side, what is important and what is less important in the maritime issues. And as you know, better than me, because you live on the seaside, but the maritime affairs and maritime issues, there's a need to have cooperation. Without cooperation, it's impossible to tackle any problem in the maritime issues. Oceans are too big, they are too complex, but you can solve the problem linked to ocean alone. So this is, as it was said by Ambassador Bhatia, it was said by Professor Bateman and Professor PV Rao, that diplomacy is needed. And Vice Chancellor said the same. We need the diplomacy, we need the dialogue, we need the institutions for maritime affairs, especially when you don't have physical borders in the ocean, when you have all the phenomena cross-border, when you have the climate change, you have blue economy, and you cannot set the borders, you cannot say that this is within my jurisdiction, because we have, as you perfectly know, the majority of ocean space beyond anybody's jurisdiction. And as it was said today, this is the common heritage of humankind. Speaking about the European Union and India, this is also there is much talk about the friendship, and we have strategic partnership with India for many years, and both Prime Minister Modi and the European Union officials, they are stressing that we are really born to be together with India. We are the same in terms of the normative powers, spiritual powers, and soft powers. So we are both the same kind. And also, what is important is that both European Union, I'm speaking about today, and India, we believe in freedom, we believe in tolerance, and we believe in the rule of law. Especially the rule of law is important in maritime affairs. So the normative power is important, and as you say, this is the as I said, this is the you are promoting the norms, you are promoting the rule of law, you are promoting standards which are common, and this is nothing special. But as I said, there's the tolerance, the partnership, and the equality, and this is a very important. But what is important that if you have this normative power, so you make the world politics more sustainable, and this is important. And for today, we know that this is really difficult to say about sustainable world politics because we have, as was said today, so we have some leaders in the world today which are not quite readable for many, and you cannot really say what would be for next day or for next year. But we have to work together. I mean, India and the European Union, just to make this sustainability a standard, a norm, because we are normative powers for others. This is not the matter of not only today, but because the power of ideas, this is something we have in common. And the normative justification, not only the tradition, but for today, this is also important. And we had charismatic leaders which show the world that they could be leaders and make world politics more sustainable and could be a normative powers and make the principles just very clarified and very simple. And this is how it works in the or how it should work in the world politics and how it works with India and the European Union. Be more practical, we are not only normative powers or soft powers, but we are also the trade powers. We are the biggest partner for India in trade. Our common market is the biggest in the world, the European Union. What is important, going now smoothly to the maritime affairs, that we are very, very important trade partners for each other, but 90% of trade between the European Union and India, it goes through sea lanes of communication. Or we are speaking about Baltic Sea, North Sea, Atlantic Ocean, Mediterranean Sea, Suez Canal, and then Indian Ocean. So this is really very, very important issue for both of us. Without securing sea lanes of communication, we just will not have a trade at the same level. For us, it's a very important issue for both of us. So this is, we know it, but also the Chinese know it. And for many, this is maybe a rocket science, but what Chinese are doing, this is not only the new maritime Silk Road here in Indian Ocean, but the continuation is in Mediterranean Sea and the North Sea. The Chinese state companies, they are taking step-by-step assets from the biggest ports in Europe. And nowadays they have more than 10% of the biggest European ports. And us knowing the very consequent policies and strategies of China, so for the next 5 to 10 years, this share will be at least 20 or 30%. If you have, like in the corporations and the companies, if you have 20 or 30% of shares, it means you can decide about everything in the company. So if China will have the share of 20 to 30% of our ports, so it can decide also, China can decide also about trade between India and Europe. So this is our common interest, also to influence and to get and just to act together. I mean to have the cooperation in the maritime affairs, and especially in speaking about ports, because if we know the story of the construction of civilian ports in the Indian Ocean region and stakes in Indian Ocean ports, but the story about taking shares and stakes in European ports, this is a little bit unknown story. But I would like to show you this, that this is our common interest to do something, to act together, not to let China to take the majority shares in our ports or in our neighborhood. We have excellent cooperation in Navy in the European Union, because we have this Atalanta activities for the last 10 years, and India for us is the most important partner in it, because we are if you take a look at the statistics and the Horn of Africa piracy, so for the number of piracy acts was decreasing year by year, and this year the number for the last since January, the number of piracy attacks was nil, just nil. It was unprecedented, so we didn't have this year any piracy act next to shore of Africa, and it is for the first time. But what does it mean? This is our joint success, but we can now secure the lines of our ships, and we can also secure our trade and cooperation and development of the cooperation between India and the European Union. So what we can do together, and we can do a lot. You have your concept, which was mentioned today, concept of Sagar. You have the economic corridor concept together with Japan between Asia and Africa. So from the European Union perspective, we have also the concept of integrated maritime policy program. This program is introduced not on the level of the institution of the European Union, but this program was introduced to every European Union country. And this program covers strengthening the position of seaports, what I talked about. It was about enhancing maritime transport competitiveness. This is also important point, just to have our ships and our transportation. Maritime safety and security, this is also something which is very significant. And coastal protection and marine environment, this is something without saying. Natural resources, we have to cooperate within natural resources and marine environment, because as I said, this is something which you cannot control by yourself. You have to cooperate with other organizations and states. Sustainable development of fisheries, we have in the European Union, this is one of the core issues. I mean, the sustainable fisheries, we have quotas, we have the sustainable fisheries program, even before introduction of integrated maritime policy. This is something which was initiated more than 40 years ago. And the last but not least is energy security, because the energy, if not from land, it could come also from the sea. If you've been to Europe and you see the seashore of many European countries, you probably saw, or if you are going, so you can see many windmills on the seashore of Baltic Sea or North Sea next to Atlantic Ocean. This is for us, this is also the source of energy, and certainly we have also the tide power plants using the forces and the strength of tides on the sea. This is also important. For the maritime issues, before European Union and before European community was established, we had one important visionary, probably well known to everyone of you, is Jacques Cousteau. And Jacques Cousteau's thoughts were not only about marine safety or let's say all the species living on the sea, but his idea was that we have to get closer to the seas and oceans. We have to use them, but certainly in a sustainable manner, and we have to become once again the part of this maritime word, but in a friendly manner. So concluding is that you probably don't know, but the disappointment with Belt and Road Initiative, and also we have 1+16 initiative from China, is growing. And we have really chance now, I mean, for India to come and to have this strategic partnership with the European Union to become a new strategic partnership with the new opening, with the new initiatives, with just this is the moment for now that we can have with the convergence of the strategic interests I show you between India and European Union, so we can have really mutual benefits from the cooperation, especially in maritime affairs, because maritime affairs nowadays they are deciding about the trade, but in the future they will decide about everything we live, and not only in India but in the European Union. Thank you.
It's a rare privilege to thank the veterans of maritime affairs like Sam Batman, Professor Rao and other people. And it is very honored to see these people again at our center. Thank you very much for coming, sir. And first and foremost, I wish to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, because he is the one who is giving endurance support to the center. All the activities which we are conducting here has kind blessings of our Vice Chancellor, and he is ready to say for everything, yes, please go ahead. So that kind of personality we have, and with some kind of interest you would have witnessed by his speech that he has a lot of knowledge about maritime affairs as well as the strategic interests of the Indian Ocean region. And secondly, we wish to thank Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia for generously accepting our invitation and coming over here and giving his speech. And we wish to thank Professor PV Rao, sir, for his keynote address. And special thanks to Professor Sam, coming all over the way to Pondicherry from Australia. And we wish to thank Ambassador Thomas from Poland. And also we wish to thank all the delegates, because the list is very big. So we wish to thank each and everyone from the Center, UGC Center for Maritime Studies, for coming here to share their views. And we wish everyone to take part in all the sessions and make as much as possible to interact with the students and share their views. So that is the purpose that we have made a huge group of people coming here with 40 numbers nearly. We are having parallel sessions, and kindly make the students, so I request students also to make maximum benefit out of all the resource persons.